Welcome to Cherry Hinton Baptist Church, and we are here to celebrate good news. And another way of describing that is we are here to celebrate the gospel of God, which in Paul's letter to the Romans, I think this is his summary of the gospel. This gospel, this good news for Cherry Hinton today and for the world today and for the world in the past and the world in the future regards his son Jesus, who really did exist. He was a descendant of David in a particular culture in a particular time. There's reality to the gospel that we are here to celebrate. And that it all begins with the spirit of holiness. The spirit that was brooding on the face of the waters at the beginning of creation in Genesis chapter 1. That spirit of being set apart, holy, being different, being perfect. That spirit was in Jesus. And that made him the Son of God with power. Interestingly, this power is made manifest. I just got my wrong slides up. This power was shown in a very odd way in the life of Jesus. For the first 30 years of Jesus's life, I don't think he accumulated anything that we would associate with power. Didn't have any monetary resources at the end of 30 years. He didn't have a social status or anything. So that's the first 30 years of his life. Nothing is recorded, apart from a visit to Jerusalem to listen to other people in the temple. And then for the next 3 years, this power of the Spirit of holiness came out in helping the lost and the least and the lonely and the last into finding hope and healing. This is the power of the gospel shown in the life of Jesus. It also, though, this power that Jesus showed confronted the powers of evil, the things that were not holy, the things that were the opposite end of the spectrum from being holy. Jesus confronted those things and was put to death by them. But this is the good news, that we have a life of Jesus that encapsulates the power of God.
We are going to kick off with the reading of the passage. We're looking at Cleopas and a friend, another disciple, traveling along. So we're going to start with the reading. Blanca, if you could unmute yourself and read this. It's going to be over 2 slides, and I will move it on at the end of this slide.
That very day, 2 of them were going to a village named Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And they stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, named Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, a man who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. And how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the third day since these things happened. Moreover, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself.
Thank you, Blanca. Okay, so we had story of Easter last week, that first Sunday, and this is continuing on from those events. I think it's important to say that these disciples were not expecting to see Jesus at that point. And indeed, for them, they didn't see Jesus at that point, in a sense. Jesus had been killed, and they were heading away from Jerusalem. It was like they were retreating. That's the situation in which we find our disciples. While they were talking and discussing together, though, Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. It might be that way with us this morning. It may be that Jesus is involved in a situation. Jesus is involved with us in conversations where we do not recognize him. Perhaps there are opportunities taking place where we don't see Jesus in action, yet he is there. It might be that we're in a sadness or a situation where we're going, Lord, how can we bear this? And yet he is there already. Without belief, we may stand still and sad without cause. I say without cause because there are reasons to be still and sad sometimes. But these disciples were still and sad, I'm saying, without cause. They stood still, looking sad. Why were they sad? Because Jesus had died, but he was there talking to them. Matthew Henry says it happened the same day that Christ rose, the first day of the new world that rose with him. If only they'd believed at this point and saw who was with them, they would have had no cause for their sadness. Indeed, we see that at the end of the story, which we're going to get a little bit later. At the moment, it was their lack of belief, their seeing Jesus in the situation, that was the cause of their sadness. It was, for them, sort of unnecessary to have their sadness at this time. We can make unnecessary sadness for ourselves in some situations. C.S. Lewis at one point describes Jesus as him who was so full of life that when he wished to die, he had to borrow death from others. That death on the cross was as a result of our sin. It wasn't part of the life of God in himself. They had hoped that he was the one to restore Israel, and they should still hope. We might have a situation that we describe like that, where we go, oh, we had hoped. We thought this. They should still hope. Their hope hasn't really changed. He is the one that's going to restore Israel. But in another way, it has changed. Because sometimes we don't quite hope the right stuff. Or sometimes we think our hope has been dashed when really it hasn't. We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. We had hoped that Jesus would overthrow Rome, kick out the Romans, We had hoped that he would bring Jewish rule and peace on earth before our eyes, perhaps. I don't think that was precisely the Jewish hope, but we had hoped that Jesus would bring this reign, this goodness of the Jewish nation to the whole world, and perhaps slaughter our enemies. But that wasn't really the hope that they should have perhaps had in mind. But then the priests, the Romans, whoever you care to name, dashed our hopes, right? We can make this our own situation too. We had hoped Jesus was going to do this, but then he died. We had hoped we were going to get this, but then that happened. We had hoped that God was our creator, but then materialism or science blew that away. And then this famous person said that, and then our friends made us feel foolish. We had hoped that Jesus would prevent our own suffering or the suffering of those we love, but then they died. Or then a natural disaster rolled in, or then the tsunami happened. We had hoped that God would make everything okay, but then this happened. We had hoped that God was caring, that God was intelligent, but then he taught X. Then he taught this thing that we particularly hate. And now we're not quite so sure. We had hoped that he was going to be the one to redeem Israel. And they're sad. And it's now the third day since these things happened. It's ancient history. It's clearly a settled matter. It's so far on. It's the third day. It's clear. It's done. But if they'd only known what the third day really was, it was the day of resurrection. It was the day of visible victory for the disciples. Moreover, in all this sadness, some women of our company amazed us. They were at the tomb early in the morning, and when they did not find his body, they came back saying that they had even seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Look at that. The women did not see his body and came back saying that he was alive. They took it as a sign of victory along with the angels. There was a believingness to it. And some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as they had said. Found it in the same situation. But him they did not see. Look at that horrible word, but there. Right? They found it just as they had said, without Jesus. And then took it as a sign of unbelief, as a sign that he wasn't alive. Where are the dead usually? Just where you leave them. Usually the dead are in that place where you've marked with a tomb, where you've marked with a gravestone. They don't typically get up again, do they? So when they found that tomb empty, Christians typically took that as a sign of belief. He's not there, he has risen. Instead of, but him they did not see. They've not seen it yet, and they're sad. But him they did not see. I find this incredible, that's their evidence for unbelief. We didn't see him. If Jesus were alive, why didn't we see him? Why not us, eh? But this is precisely what the women said. They did not see him. Remember the angel's testimony. Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. If they had seen him, that would go against what these angels were saying for those particular disciples at this particular time. Not that Jesus couldn't, by right, appear to them in the graveyard. The thing about the living is they walk around, right? He might be there, but he might not. Might be somewhere else. Might be walking with them on the road right now. What God said is wholly in agreement that they should not have seen him there. We need to seek God where he is. An empty grave is an argument for the resurrection and an argument for rejoicing. they'd went back and found his body there, that would have been a problem. We had hoped, this is perhaps us now, we had hoped that Jesus would bring peace on earth, an end to the coronavirus immediately, before our eyes, before the third day. That's too long. Jesus didn't say it'd be like that. Jesus didn't say it would be as they expected, and so they didn't see it. Yet, in a very real way, he did what they expected. He was alive, and Caesar's throne is very secondary. And now it's exceptionally secondary. Now it's gone in a much more permanent way. But Christians would attest that Jesus is Lord, even when they died for it. Jesus was the one who was going to redeem Israel. He is. He is alive, and that victory was completed. We might say, we hope that God was our creator, but then materialism, science, evolution theories, etc., blew that away. Science describes the material universe, and we may or may not see God there. The same evidence to some people can appear like God or not. So, for example, the first person in space, Yuri Gagarin, when he came back, the publicity around him coming back, there was posters and things where he said, I looked and looked, but I didn't see God. That was his experience of space, or at least what was publicized about his experience of space. I looked and looked, but I didn't see God. By contrast, when NASA sent people to orbit the moon, they read from Genesis. They looked out and they saw, and they at least sent back word that related to the creation of God. So it's not that they looked and they saw God, but you can see within the world what God has made if you have the eyes to see it, or not. Or you could say, I looked and looked and didn't see. When I was growing up, Richard Dawkins was roughly having his heyday of attacking religion, and 2006 was the God delusion. No scientist could possibly believe in all this Jesus or God stuff, right? But that was the same year that Francis Collins released a book called The Language of God. Francis Collins was the head of the Human Genome Project, a very eminent scientist indeed. And he released his book same year about how he saw God operating. It's not a case of we need to look and look and never see God. The same evidence can give rise to both viewpoints. Science, we may think, shows that dead people stay dead, right? Science shows us that. People have believed that for a really long time, right? People have generally believed that the dead stay dead. That's why resurrection is a miracle. That's why these people didn't expect to see Jesus there. That's why they were sad. And they're the disciples, some of them, right? They didn't expect Jesus to stand up and start walking. Even though Jesus had told them, they still didn't expect it. They were surprised. We may think Jesus would prevent our suffering, although the suffering of those we love, but Jesus didn't say that. Jesus suffered, and he said we'd suffer. Let's listen to what he really tells us. We may think that God is caring and intelligent, but then he taught this. Let's hang on to that God is caring and intelligent, because we may not understand this. We may not understand this precise aspect of his teaching. But there may be bits we do understand and still don't like. That's very possible as well. We might understand something that we think is in the way. Our concern should be, is it true? These disciples, they heard that Jesus had been risen from the dead, and they didn't get it. But if their concern is it true? That will make all the difference in the world. Jesus had told them, his disciples, that he would die and come back to life. Their friends had told them their experience to back this up. They found evidence of what the people had saying. What they saw was in direct agreement with what the women had seen, but it was less than they wanted. What is our response to God's evidence in our lives? What was Jesus' response to their slow belief? Was it, there? It's not your fault. Don't worry. I never expected you to understand. It doesn't matter. Poor creatures. No, he doesn't belittle them that way. He doesn't say it's not important, because it is important. He doesn't say he didn't expect it of them. What does he say? Oh, foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets had spoken. It can be cutting, right? The amount of times I've been foolish and slow of heart, and I'd have had joy if only I'd believed what God had said to me. He gives them a rebuke and a remedy, and they're both found in the same place. He doesn't tell them off because they didn't believe the women, although in places he does tell off the disciples for that, right? But here he doesn't tell them off because they didn't believe the women, and he doesn't tell them off even that they didn't believe Jesus because Jesus had already told them this was going to happen. No, he gives a rebuke and a remedy that are the same place. The rebuke and the remedy are both that you should believe the scriptures. Why would that be so? Partly they've known the scriptures a really long time. Partly, perhaps it's to help us. We still have the scriptures very much in front of us. They've had the scriptures in front of them. We've got the scriptures in front of us. No, you foolish, unbelieving people, right? Let's believe the scriptures you've had for a really long time. And beginning with Moses and the prophets, and for the Jews, Moses wrote Genesis, so like that's saying all of it, right? Beginning with Moses and the prophets, he interpreted to them the scriptures, in the scriptures, the things concerning himself. So if we're slow of heart to believe, let's see Jesus in the scriptures. And we might find him walking with us and interpreting them to us as well. Let's look in the scriptures because they are full of Jesus. The old and the new, they are full of Jesus. And if we're full of Jesus, we'll be joyful, right? Let's be full of Jesus. Let's eat this stuff, right? That is seen as the bread, right? That is life to us. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Where was Jesus in the Old Testament? You might look and think, I looked and looked, but I didn't see Jesus in the Old Testament. He was there all along. He was in the scriptures, he's in the Old Testament, and they just had to see it. Now, this is something I like as an illustration of that. I saw this picture, the one of the eagle there, on Jessica's Facebook. I rather liked it. And it reminded me, as an eagle, it reminds me a bit of, Nick's mentioned the Spirit brooding over the waters. And Nick put up that other picture a while ago of Jesus being like the hen wanting to gather the chicks, right? So it reminds me of those things. But there was also instructions to turn it the other way up, because when we turn it the other way up, we see something different, right? And we find that Jesus was there all along. He was there all along. We just had to look at it the right way. It might be that the thing that we look at, it's a perfectly nice image of an eagle. Maybe if we turn it the other way, we'll see something else. Maybe it's like that with the Old Testament. Perfectly good story about Noah. Perfectly good story about Abraham. Perfectly good story about Moses. But then if we look for Jesus in the picture, maybe we find him there. And maybe the disciples were expected to find him there. This is, I think, Jesus in Genesis 22, at least a story about Jesus, about what Jesus would do. Many Christians see this as a story about Jesus. We've got Abraham told to sacrifice his son Isaac. Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. What do we see in this picture? The word there for only son, I'm told, is the same as the sort of word that gets used to describe Jesus and means unique son. I prefer unique because in a sort of point of fact, Abraham had other sons, right? So where you see it say, your only son Isaac, sometimes you could get in a twiddle and go, but he had another son, right? God has other children as well, in a sense, because we are adopted into his family. So when you see only son Isaac. Perhaps think unique son. Son in a different way. Son of the promise. I think this is a picture of Jesus. And go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering. So we see that there will be a need for sacrifice, a need for death. And therefore, when Jesus died, they should have seen it coming. We are then told that God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son, in Abraham's words. God will provide himself the lamb, and he does, and he is. Jesus is that lamb. Jesus bears that suffering and that sacrifice on our behalf so that Isaac didn't have to. And then the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place where he would have to sacrifice his son. And it turned out to be the place where he got his son back from the dead, in a figure of speaking. And God said to him, when Abraham was going to go through with it, don't lay your hand on the boy. And in that way, he kind of got him back from the dead. And it spoke of Jesus that way too. And Abraham went and took the ram, because there was a ram caught in a thicket or a thorn bush. And you can see on that picture of Jesus that Jesus is in the thorns. And Abraham saw this ram in the thorn bush, the thicket. And he took that and sacrificed it. And we can see in that ram in the picture, the artwork, there are some thorns around that ram. It was a picture of Jesus, what Jesus would do, because he would bear the thorns, the pain, the sin, the sacrifice. But then he'd come back to life, just as Isaac went back with them. I think this is but one picture in the Old Testament. I think the Old Testament is full of Jesus. Here, but that's not what most people think of with Moses, right? Most people, when they think of Moses, they don't think of Abraham. Maybe I'm being a bit naughty, right? Here is God in Exodus 3. There's the first time when God speaks with Moses that he's aware of. He appears in the burning bush. Now, I'm told and I believe that the word for bush there includes a reference to being prickly or spiky or something like that. And so older commentators take it to be a thorn bush. Why on earth would God appear in a thorn bush? Not a majestic tree, a thorn bush. The blog I got this particular picture from says, Cavalry's tree is Moses's thorn bush. And I think that's close, but not quite right. I think that we do see the same sort of images there of the thorns. I think that's important. Thorns, I take as an image of humanity's sinfulness. That actually we mess up and we cause pain and we are as if thorns. And God appears in that thorn bush, and it's a burning bush. And I like the fieriness of the image of the eagle and Jesus. And in this thorn bush, Moses came over and he was keeping his flock. So we see there the sheep sort of aspect as well, right? We've got that same picture. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire. Now, Nick's already talked about holiness, and from holiness comes this flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, this holiness, yet it was not consumed. It wasn't done away with. It wasn't destroyed. How marvelous and how curious. Moses was keeping the flock, and then God spoke to him out this thorn bush and said, do not come near. He says to him to take off his sandals because it's holy ground. And so we see why this flame might have been, that God was holy, God was pure. And here we are as like a thorn bush. Here we are as people that are sinful and cause pain and hurt one another. And God's here as this holy fire. And there's this injunction to stay away. And that's problematic. But then the Lord speaks to him some more and says, I have surely seen the affliction of my people and have heard their cry. I know their sufferings, and I have come to deliver them. This is Jesus, isn't it? Bearing the thorns, holy, pure, coming to deliver. because we are like that thorn bush. Now, we can see Jesus being a bit like God in that thorn bush, coming down to deliver them. But fire has some other consequences. It proceeds from the holiness of God. It's on this thorn bush. This thorn bush isn't consumed. Fire can be an image of purifying or of affliction, but also of punishment. There are these twin aspects to fire, and we are to be holy people. We are to be purified and made holy before God. And I believe that through the cross of Christ, he takes our suffering. He takes that punishment element and that affliction. He's come down to deliver us, and we can be made pure in the presence of God through his sacrifice. But that's not the only biblical image of how God deals with weeds. Jesus also gives us solemn warnings about a fire that does not end. Jesus says this in a parable: as the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. God gives us solemn warnings as well as great hope. Why bother to say that? Because it is true. C.S. Lewis says, men do not long continue to think what they have forgotten how to say. Well, Jesus said this, so let us never forget it. Let's rejoice in the God that saw our sufferings and came down to deliver us by taking them himself. Let's put our trust in Jesus to deliver us from our sins now. In a minute or so, we're going to sing Trust and Obey. People can go outside to sing it. I say in a minute or so because I just like quiet reflection for about a minute before we do that song. I'm aware that what I've said so far has been a bit solemn and a bit glum, but here comes the happy end to the story, as it were, where they actually do see that it's Jesus. We're going to have Alan Tobin reading this section. It's just on one slide. So Alan, if you're present, if you could unmute yourself and read it, that'd be brilliant.
There we are. Sorry about that. So they drew near to the village to which they were going. He acted if he was going farther, but they urged him strongly, saying, stay with us, for it is towards evening and the day is nigh far spent. So he went to stay with them. When he was at table with them, he took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, did not our hearts burn within us while he talked to us on the road, while he opened to us the scriptures? And they rose that same hour and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, the Lord is risen indeed, and has appeared to Simon. And then they told what had happened on the road, and now he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. Thanks, Peter.
Marvelous. So what a difference their belief makes when they see Jesus with them. What a difference it makes. He took the bread and he blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. We're going to have communion in a couple of minutes. This section's not going to take as long. And their eyes were opened. with the fall, with Adam and Eve, when they took the fruit, their eyes were opened and they saw themselves and that they were naked, and that was a problem, right, for them. That's what happened in the fall. Their eyes were opened and it was a bad thing. But here, their eyes are opened and they're open to Jesus, and it's marvelous and it's all been put right. Their eyes are open to the fact that he's alive and with them. And he vanished from their sight. I put it in red, but it wasn't really a problem. Before, when they didn't see Jesus, that was a big problem, and the world was coming to an end, and everything was going wrong. But here, he vanished from their sight, and that's not the issue, because they still know. They still know he's been there with them. And they said to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us?" The dead wood's been burnt away. Their unbelief has gone. Did not our hearts burn within us? They had something of a purifying experience, right? They understood more. It was joyous. They were on fire for Jesus. Well, he talked to us on the road while he opened to us the scriptures. And they rose that same hour, almost as if they were back from the dead. They rose that same hour. Jesus back from the dead. And they returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together. They weren't going off separate anymore. They were gathered together. And they found that they were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed." They were saying the same thing. And has appeared to Simon. They got such encouragement. And they told what had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of the bread. They discussed it amongst themselves with great joy, and Jesus being with them. As it turned out, he was with them for a long time, and they didn't know it. It made all the difference. Their hope is restored, and our hope is similar. Jesus is with us by his Spirit. He will come back visibly. Let's believe him. Let's love him. He is here. Practical conclusions. What do we not believe that we feel is biblical? And is that a choice of ours? Is that something where we see the same evidence as other people that do believe and we go, no? Is it a choice? I'd say from this passage, we talk together about it. We discuss it with one another, like the disciples were doing at first and like they continue to do with Jesus. Research it. Look into it. Perhaps other people have a different perspective. Perhaps other people see Jesus where we don't. Pray about it. They were talking to Jesus. We can talk to Jesus too. Resolve, though, to do what Jesus said, which in this case was to look for Christ in the scriptures. I really commend that to you. I really commend for you, for when you read this passage, to think, what is this saying about Jesus? Where is Jesus in this story? In the old and the new, as the God who came down to save us. And then perhaps we take opportunities to tell others about it. That's important. Take opportunities to tell others that we have found Jesus. The disciples told other disciples, but then they told others as well. And they may or may not believe you. But talking about it with others is still good, because maybe they will, and maybe there will be great rejoicing. So, may you know the blessing of your heavenly Father, who sees your pain, of your Savior Jesus, who came down to save us and did it, and of the Holy Spirit living in you like a holy fire, today and every day forever. Amen. Marvelous. Have a wonderful week.